Hello, this unit is about project management. Project management is a significant topic in operations management, and there are many places that have a full course on project management, but we're going to cover it relatively quickly, mostly to provide an introduction into the concept. With this project management section, I will have 4 short PowerPoint presentations and then 3 accompanying examples where I will do hand-drawn networks to show you how to work through a network. So this one provides a quick overview on the concept of project management. So what is project management? A project is a set of interrelated activities that with a definite starting and ending point, which results in a unique outcome for a specific allocation of resources. So that, think of an example where you are building a house and there are activities where you clear the lot and you dig the foundation and then you pour the cement and then you frame the house and then you put on this. And so there are those sort of discrete activities that have to go together that we need to develop a plan to figure out how long that will take and how to do it most effectively. We have to consider the linkages between tasks or between activities. For example, you can't frame the house before you've poured the foundation, and so understanding the relationship between those activities becomes important. The main goals of project management are to budget the time and complete the project on time or earlier, not to exceed the budget, and to meet the specifications to the satisfaction of the customer, whether that customer is an internal customer or an external customer. So the project management is the process by which we manage or control the execution of a series of tasks with a specific goal at the end of it. So there are some obvious characteristics of projects. There's a start and a finish. There are many related activities that are linked. There is some complexity to the planning, control, and supply chain. So there's some complexity to thinking about these things. We're different types of personnel resources, different types of equipment resources, different types of financial resources that have to come to bear within this project, and we need to think about those sorts of things as we do the plan. Some examples are construction of buildings, roads, or bridges, research projects, system implementations. Wedding planners do this, trip planning, renovations. I worked for a long time as a management consultant, and we would do project management and project plans as part of the bidding process to set a timeline and then to monitor whether we were meeting that timeline. So there are all sorts of parameters around the types of things that could be projects that would have to be, managed. So what do we have to do? We have to plan them. We have to decide what the goal is. We have to define the project. We have to identify who the team working on the project is. We have to schedule the project and the tasks. This relates to not only scheduling those individual activities through the process, but also scheduling the people that have to come in, the expenditures that come and are associated with specific activities, and the technology that we need to deploy in each of those circumstances. We also need to think about then, so we plan it, we schedule it, and then we control it, where we monitor it, we make sure that things are going on time and on budget, and make adjustments as we need to. So project management is not only a planning but an execution support process. It's critically important. So understanding the scope and objectives of a project is important. It defines the tasks that are important. It defines the time frame. It defines what you're going to allocate to that project, and it also then without maybe perhaps saying it explicitly, it also outlines what you are not going to do. So understanding that becomes an important element of budget and resource control, to say, well, you know, this is the objective, this is the scope of the project, and some tasks often get added to projects which aren't actually in the original plan, which may cost more. Now, sometimes there are adjustments, there are changes in plan, and as long as those are done on purpose, it's a reasonable thing to do. But if we're adding things without thinking about the budget, without thinking about the impact on time, then we're causing ourselves some problems, and the project could go off the rails. So the objective statement says, what is it we're trying to do? The objective statement really goes back to being a touchstone, if you will, for is this task consistent with achieving that goal, or is it superfluous? And so it also has a time frame for start and ending of the project, and also a budget in terms of dollars and personnel and equipment associated with that. The scope of the project sets the parameters within which that project is going to be executed. And changes in project scope, as I just said, usually result in increased costs and delays. And there is there's a concept called scope creep. Scope creep often shows up on exam questions in my experience. This is a very common one in operations management courses, and it refers to incremental changes to scope, or as activities get added that aren't sort of core to what the original parameters of the project were, that scope of the project is going to expand, and essentially create additional demands for resources, and often cause budget overruns, which are a particular problem if you didn't get the expansion of scope approved by a client or a supervisor or whoever. So scope creep isn't necessarily bad as long as it happens in a controlled and proactive way. Scope creep is usually a negative thing in that we add tasks without thinking about the implications for the broader project. So there are some key steps in project scheduling. The first is identifying precedence relationships. And precedence relationships means that one task cannot happen until another task has been completed. So you can't brush your teeth without putting toothpaste on your toothbrush. And so precedence relationships establish sort of the critical sequence of activities within the project, and the activities that can't happen simultaneously. Then we have sequencing, which is looking at those precedence relationships and establishing sort of the order in which things are going to happen. And we don't always just have to think about precedence relationships. We have to think about resources available. So if task A needs to be done before task B can happen, but task C is completely independent of them both, but requires the same people, task A needs to happen, and even though B and C could happen at the same time, we might schedule it for later just because of a resource constraint. We have to know how long things are going to take, how much they're going to cost. We have to estimate requirements of money, equipment, and then we have to say which activities are critical. And that's not to say which activities we can do without. It is to say which activities are crucial to happen on time and on budget for this project to happen on time. And we'll talk about critical path analysis coming up in this and in other videos to follow on project management. And so there are a number of things that we can use to execute project management. There's a Gantt chart, which is a simple chart, often done in Excel, but there's also software to do it. And I'll show you an example which sort of sequences tasks and gives us, again, a roadmap for completing the project. There's something called the critical path method and PERT, or the program evaluation and review technique, which are processes that will be covered in subsequent videos and examples, by which we document networks of activities, where we document projects, and then understand what the critical path is and what we can do to lengthen or shorten projects to manage their timing and budget. Here's a simple Gantt chart, and I apologize again that my head is in the way on some of these things on the bottom right here. But you can see that here is a simple project. We have a design, and the design is ongoing from January to June. We have prototype development, and prototype development can't happen till at least some design is done, and we can't test until at least some of prototype development is done. We can then revise once we've done some testing and we do some adjustments, and then we have production here, which happens close to the end of the task. So this is another example of a Gantt chart, where you can see again the lines here provide sort of not necessarily the duration, but the time frame for the project. When we do a critical path, we look specifically at the duration, whereas this is more a time frame. This is a deadline which it needs to get finished. This is a starting point. So some of these things, deplaning, cargo and mail, galley servicing, can all start at container offload, can all start at the same time. Baggage claim for passengers can't happen right at the beginning because we haven't unloaded those things. So you can see here, within the context of a Gantt chart, the relationships between different tasks. And so, as example, here on flight service, galley cabin check can't happen till first class cleaning is done, and most of the economy section cleaning is done, and we can't board passengers until that check is done. So a Gantt chart provides you, again, with a time frame for things, shows some sequence, and gives you a planning or benchmarking tool. Let's talk a little bit quickly about some of the advantages of the PERT and CPM, which we'll introduce in more detail in subsequent videos with some examples. And there's you know, they are structured tools, as you'll see, that allow you to plan and benchmark a project's execution. They're useful when scheduling and controlling large projects. As I said before, I was an academic. I worked as a management consultant for a long time, and we used these methods in defining consulting projects and executing consulting projects all the time. I subsequently worked in an advertising agency in a marketing role for a while, and we used these things for campaigns as well. It becomes critically important to understand the sequence with which things have to happen, and then back off As an example, we had a client who was launching a new product who hadn't incorporated the time it was going to take to order packaging. So because they hadn't ordered because they didn't include that, they didn't get the design of packaging done in time. They ordered packaging, and then packaging wasn't going to arrive until well after their launch plan. So understanding these things in a variety of roles becomes critically important. It's very straightforward concept. It's structured, and it's not mathematically complex, which students always love. The visual or graphical networks, which you will see in examples in subsequent videos, help highlight the relationships among project activities. It really highlights that precedence relationship, gives you a really strong visual impression. And the critical path and slack time analyses, which you'll see in the next video, help pinpoint activities that need to be closely watched. Critical path means it has to happen on time in order for the project to finish. If something has slack or excess time, it's not as important that it gets done exactly on time. A critical path is one where this has to finish on time so the next task can start on time, so that the next task can start on time, and otherwise our project is going to go too long. And this visual nature of these project networks really helps facilitate that kind of tracking. It also allows you to document who's responsible when and who is deployed when and where. So it becomes a very strong visual and shared vision for the project. As I said, it's very flexible and applicable to a wide range of projects, and it's useful in not only planning the project, but also in benchmarking or monitoring a project to make sure things go well. The limitations are you have to have discrete and clearly defined activities so that you can do a plan. If the plan, if you're not as sure as what the steps are in, if there's some uncertainty, this approach doesn't work as well. You have to have clarity on precedence relationships that are clear, specified, and definitive. Time estimates tend to be subjective and are subject to fudging by managers, and if that happens, then your plan and management can fall down. Now, we're going to talk in a couple of videos later about incorporating uncertainty, time uncertainty into projects. The first examples we'll do are ones when we're definitive as to how long things are going to take. And that with some projects it's much easier to say definitively how long something is going to take. And while it's critically important to understand what the critical path is, sometimes with our focus on the critical path, we take our eyes off the ball on some of those other tasks. So it's also important to know what's going on throughout the project, and sometimes the focus on the critical path can cause managers to miss both opportunities or things going off the rails. So, in summary, this is a sort of a quick 20-minute introduction to project management. Project management is useful for both large and small projects. It is a very powerful tool. It is one of the tools that I think is probably the most useful in an introductions to operations management course, and it's broadly applicable. You know, you do the planning, you do the scheduling, and then you do the execution. You need to follow them in a systematic way, and the manager of a project really has huge responsibility in making sure that the project is completed on time with the right quality and within budget. So managing those things becomes important, and that's why this is such a powerful tool. That gives you very quickly an introduction into the concept of project management. I will follow up with videos introducing diagramming a project network, shortening or crashing a project, incorporating uncertainty around times into a project, and then I will also do some examples so that you can follow along in developing project networks.